Stay in the kitchen, Elena, and for God's sake, take off that apron and try to look like, I don't know, a caterer? Just don't let them see you're my sister. My brother Leo's words hit me like a physical slap. But his eyes never left the mirror. He was busy straightening his $3,000 tuxedo, preparing for the most important dinner of his life. He had spent the last 2 years climbing the social ladder of the Van Doren family, a dynasty that owned half the shipping ports on the East Coast. He had finally married their youngest daughter, and tonight was the night the patriarch, Silas Van Doren, was coming to dinner to discuss Leo's future in the family business. "Leo, it's my house too," I said, my voice steady despite the medical shock of his blatant disrespect. "I'm the one who helped you pay the down payment on this place. Why am I being hidden like a dirty secret?" Leo turned, his social mask slipping into a snarl. "Because you look like a librarian on a budget, Elena. Look at you. You work some remote consulting job from your bedroom in leggings. The Van Dorens are royalty. They value prestige, lineage, and power. If they see my sister as some nobody who doesn't even own a Chanel bag, they'll think I'm a fraud. I need them to believe I come from a certain caliber of people, so just stay out of sight. I told them you're the hired help for the evening if they happen to catch a glimpse of you." He didn't wait for my response. He walked out of the kitchen, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floors I had paid for. I stood there, clutching a tray of appetizers, feeling the permanent foreclosure of our relationship. My brother had become a stranger, a man who viewed people only as assets or liabilities. To him, I was a liability, a smudge on his carefully curated image of a self-made millionaire. The mirror paradox of the situation was almost comical. Leo thought he was protecting his reputation from me. He didn't realize that the remote consulting job he mocked was the reason he was even in the same zip code as the Van Dorens. He knew I worked in finance, but he never bothered to ask who I worked for. He assumed that because I didn't post my life on social media, my life didn't matter. I heard the front door chime, and the air in the house seemed to shift. The Van Dorens had arrived. I could hear Silas's booming voice, a voice I recognized instantly. It was a voice that had been in my ear on encrypted conference calls for the last 6 months. Silas Van Doren wasn't just a shipping tycoon. He was my primary client. And he was currently in a surgical strike battle to save his company from a hostile takeover, a battle I was leading for him. "Leo, marvelous place." I heard Silas roar from the foyer. "You've done well for yourself. Though I must say the financial structure of this property purchase was intriguing, very sophisticated. I assumed you had a top-tier advisor." "Oh, you know, Silas." Leo's voice was slick, oily with a false glow of confidence. "I handle all my own affairs. It's all about knowing when to strike and when to hold. Please come into the dining room. I've had my staff prepare something special." I stood behind the kitchen's swinging door, peering through the small glass window. I watched Silas, a man of 70 with eyes like a hawk, take his seat. Beside him was his daughter, Leo's wife, who was busy preening herself in the reflection of her wine glass. They looked like the glow of high society, but I knew the truth. Silas was desperate. His company was bleeding, and he was looking for a resolution that only I could provide. Leo was laughing, pouring wine and acting the part of the great success. He didn't know that the staff he had just insulted was the only person in the world who could sign this paperwork to save Silas's empire. He was treating me like a servant, while I was holding the keys to his father-in-law's kingdom. "Leo," Silas said, his brow furrowing as he looked toward the kitchen door. "I smell something familiar. That spice. Is that saffron and wild thyme? There's only one person I know who insists on that specific blend for her appetizers." My heart hammered against my ribs. The status flip was approaching. I looked down at my librarian outfit, a simple black sweater and slacks, and I realized I didn't need a Chanel bag to be the most powerful person in the room. I pushed the swinging door open. The mirror paradox of our upbringing was that Leo always chased the light, while I learned how to manipulate the shadows. My brother believed that power was something you wore, a watch, a title, a specific shade of blue on a silk tie. To him, the glow of success was purely visual. He spent his 20s networking at golf clubs and gala events, building a social mask that was as expensive as it was hollow. I spent mine in front of 3 monitors, decoding the DNA of failing corporations and stitching them back together. To my family, I was the quiet one, the daughter who did something with spreadsheets. In a darkened home office, they never realized that the spreadsheets I was managing were the heartbeats of the very industries they admired from a distance. 2 years ago, when Silas Van Doren's shipping empire began to tremble under the weight of a predatory acquisition attempt, he didn't call a big box firm with a glass lobby. He called the architect. That was the pseudonym I used. In the upper echelons of the financial world, a ghost, consultant known for surgical strike turnarounds. Silas knew me only as a voice on an encrypted line and a signature on a digital contract. I had spent 18 months working 18-hour days to insulate his assets, moving his capital through safe havens and outmaneuvering some of the most ruthless sharks on Wall Street. I was the one who had saved his legacy, yet he had never seen my face. We were bound by a medical shock of mutual necessity. He needed my brain, and I needed my anonymity. The irony was that while I was saving the Van Doren fortune, Leo was busy trying to marry into it. He saw the Van Dorens as a status flip for his own mediocre career. He didn't see a family in crisis. He saw a gold-plated elevator. Every time he came over to the house I had quietly financed through a private trust, he would lecture me about my lack of vision. He would boast about his high-level meetings with Silas's board members, never realizing that those same board members were sending me panicked emails at 3 a.m., begging for my approval on their next move. "You just don't get it, Elena," he had told me once, while I was literally in the middle of authorizing a $200 million bridge loan for his future father-in-law. People like Silas Van Doren don't respect back-office types. They respect leaders. They respect men who can walk into a room and command the air. You're just a janitor of data. You're never going to be at the table where the real decisions are made. I had simply nodded, my fingers dancing across the keys as I finalized the very merger that would keep Leo's future wife in diamonds for the next decade. The resolution of my plan was never supposed to involve a dramatic reveal. I enjoyed the invisibility. It gave me the freedom to move through the world without the permanent foreclosure of public scrutiny. But as the months went by, Leo's behavior became a surgical strike on our family bonds. He started treating our parents like social liabilities, and tonight, his decision to relegate me to the I hired help because I didn't fit the vantage of his new lifestyle was the final straw. He wanted to hide the ghost in the kitchen? Fine, but he forgot that a ghost is the only thing in the house that can walk through walls. Silas Van Doren had mentioned to me a week ago that he was finally meeting his son-in-law's elusive sister. He told me on our nightly briefing call, "I'm dining with young Leo tonight." He tells me his sister is a bit of a recluse, struggling to find her footing. Poor girl. It's a shame. If she had even half the drive of my architect, she'd be a force to be reckoned with. I had kept my voice neutral, but a cold glow of anticipation had settled in my chest. I knew Silas was a man who valued true worth above all else. He despised pretenders, and Leo was the ultimate pretender. As I pushed open that swinging door, carrying a tray of the very hors d'oeuvre Silas had specifically requested during our last strategy session, I wasn't just Elena, the hidden sister. I was the person who owned the air Silas breathed. The status flip wasn't just coming. It was already in the room, waiting for the gatekeeper to realize he had locked the wrong person out. The janitor was done cleaning. It was time to show them who really owned the house. The swinging door didn't make a sound, but the silence that followed my entrance was deafening. I stepped into the dining room, the silver tray balanced on my hand like a shield. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the glow of candlelight reflecting off the crystal glassware. Leo was mid-laugh, leaning toward Silas with a practiced, sycophantic grin, his hand resting on a bottle of wine that cost more than my first car. He didn't even look at me at first. I was just the staff fulfilling a function. "Ah, finally," Leo said, his voice dripping with a condescending social mask for Silas's benefit. "Just set the appetizers in the center, please. And then you can head back and start on the main course. We don't want to be disturbed during our business discussion." He flicked his fingers at me, a dismissive gesture meant to signal my exit. But I didn't move. I walked directly toward the head of the table. I saw Silas Van Doren's expression shift. He had been looking at Leo with a polite, bored medical shock of endurance, but as I came into the light, his eyes narrowed. He looked at my face, Then at the specific way the wild time was garnished on the plate, AI, signature detail we had joked about during a midnight crisis call 3 months ago. Silas froze. His fork clattered against the china, a sharp sound that cut through Leo's nervous rambling. Silas stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped against the floor like a surgical strike against the room's rhythm. Elena? Silas whispered. The name didn't sound like it was being spoken to a caterer. It sounded like a prayer being answered. Leo's glow vanished instantly, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated terror. He looked from Silas to me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Silas, I think you're mistaken. This is just... She's the help for the night. She's a bit of a recluse, probably just has a common face. Elena, go back to the kitchen now. Silas ignored him entirely. He stepped around the table, his eyes never leaving mine. The voice, Silas said, his voice trembling with a mixture of medical shock and profound relief. I've spent 100 hours on the phone with that voice. The wild time, the black and white logic. You're the architect. You're the one who stopped the hemorrhaging. In my shipping lines when everyone else said, I was finished. The status flip was so violent, I could almost see the room spinning for Leo. He grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. The architect? Silas, you're talking about your lead strategist. No, that's impossible. My sister is a freelancer. She works from her bedroom. She's a nobody. She's been hiding in the back because she's embarrassed of her career. Silas turned to Leo, and for the first time, the social mask of the polite father-in-law was gone. In its place was the surgical strike of a billionaire who realized he was being played by a fool. You told me your sister was a struggling recluse. Leo, you told me she was the staff tonight. You hid the woman who saved my entire family's legacy in the kitchen while you bragged about handling your own affairs. I didn't know, Leo stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. She never told me. Elena, tell him. Tell him you're just a data entry clerk. I set the tray down on the table with a deliberate, calm resolution. I looked at Silas and gave him a small, professional nod, the same nod I would give in a high-stakes boardroom. It's good to finally meet you in person, Silas, and you're right about the time. It balances the acidity of the evening perfectly. Silas let out a booming laugh, but it wasn't a happy one. It was a laugh of permanent foreclosure for Leo's future. He reached out and took my hand, shaking it with more respect than he had ever shown my brother. Leo, you absolute idiot, Silas said, his voice cold. You didn't hide her because you were embarrassed for her. You hid her because you were afraid her light would show everyone just how small you really are. Leo's wife, who had been silent until now, stared at me with a mixture of awe and medical shock. The janitor was gone. The ghost had materialized at the head of the table. And as Silas pulled out a chair for me, the chair right next to his, I watched the glow of Leo's carefully constructed world turn to ash. The dining room had been transformed into a courtroom, and Leo was the only one on trial. He sat frozen, his hand still hovering over the wine bottle he had been using as a prop for his success. The glow of the chandelier now felt like a spotlight on a crime scene. Silas didn't return to his seat. Instead, he remained standing next to me, his presence a surgical strike against my brother's remaining dignity. Sit down, Elena, Silas said, his voice dropping the jovial tone of a father-in-law and adopting the steel of a CEO. It seems I've been making my investment decisions based on a very skewed social mask. Leo, you told me that the restructure of your holding company was your brainchild. You told me you were the one who identified the ghost ledger in the shipping sector, but I'm looking at the woman who actually did the work, and she's wearing the apron you forced her into. Silas, please, Leo whispered, the medical shock of the situation making his voice crack. It's a family dynamic. Elena helps me with the technical stuff, sure, but the vantage, the leadership, that was all me. She's great with numbers, but she doesn't have the stomach for the big moves. I was just protecting her from the stress. I leaned back in the velvet chair, feeling the resolution of years of silence finally crystallizing. I didn't need to shout. The mirror paradox was clear to everyone in the room. Leo, you didn't protect me from the stress. You stole the credit for the stress. Silas, did Leo tell you about the surgical strike we supposedly coordinated on the Baltic accounts last month? Silas shook his head, his eyes narrowing. He said he stayed up for 72 hours straight to finalize the liquidation. He was in Cabo, I said simply, the truth landing like a permanent foreclosure on Leo's lies. I was the one who stayed up. I was the one who bypassed the firewalls. While he was posting photos of his celebratory vacation, I was the one ensuring your company didn't go under by sunrise. I sent the final authorization from the very laptop he told me to hide tonight. The room went cold. Leo's wife looked at him with a mixture of medical shock and disgust. She wasn't just seeing a liar. She was seeing a man who was willing to bury his own sister's genius to maintain a social mask of competence. The status flip was now complete. The person they thought was a struggling freelancer was the only reason they weren't currently filing for bankruptcy. You used me, Silas said, his voice a low growl directed at Leo. You used my daughter, and you used the most brilliant mind in my organization who happens to be your own blood, to grift your way into a seat at this table. You aren't a titan, Leo. You're a janitor who forgot he was supposed to be cleaning the floors, not sitting on the throne. Silas turned to me, his expression softening into one of deep, true worth recognition. Elena, I came here tonight to discuss a merger. I thought I was merging with Leo's firm, but it's clear now that the firm is you. I don't want his vantage, I want your architect mind. As for Leo, well, the surgical strike starts tonight. He looked back at my brother, who was now trembling visibly. The partnership I promised you? It's gone. The executive package I signed off on? Consider it under permanent foreclosure. You have exactly 1 hour to explain to my daughter why you thought she deserved to marry a fraud. After that, I expect you to be out of this house, the house I now realize Elena paid for. I watched as Leo's world disintegrated. He looked at me, pleading with his eyes for a resolution I wouldn't give him. He had spent his life trying to make me invisible. Now, for the first time, everyone saw him for exactly what he was, a shadow that had finally run out of light. The medical shock of the room had shifted from a family crisis into a clinical, professional execution. Silas Van Doren didn't just sit down. He took command of the table as if it were a war room. He signaled to his daughter, who handed him a leather-bound folder she had pulled from her bag. For months, I had been feeding Silas's legal team anonymous data regarding internal leaks within the Van Doren shipping network. I hadn't named names yet, waiting for the surgical strike moment where the truth would do the most damage. That moment was now. Leo, Silas began, his voice cold and devoid of the social mask of family warmth. When you married my daughter, you were given access to a discretionary fund for market research. You told me you were using that capital to seed new tech ventures. But Elena, or should I say the architect, has been tracking that capital. It didn't go into tech. It went into a series of offshore accounts designed to short sell my own company's stock, right? Before major announcements, the silence that followed was heavy with permanent foreclosure. Leo looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. He had thought I was just a ghost in the machine, a silent observer. He didn't realize that as the architect, I wasn't just building Silas's company, I was building the cage that was now closing around him. I didn't think you'd look, Leo whispered, his voice a ragged edge of despair. You were always so busy with the remote consulting. I thought you'd be happy I was finally making big moves. I was doing it for us. For the family name? You were doing it for the glow of a lifestyle you didn't earn, I replied, my voice reflecting the hard resolution of a woman who had finally finished a long, dirty job. You weren't shorting the stock to help the family, Leo. You were betting against the livelihood of 10,000 employees because you wanted a faster boat and a louder reputation. You thought I was hiding in the kitchen because I was ashamed? The truth is, I was in the kitchen because it's the best place to watch the janitor work. And I've been cleaning up your paper trail for 6 months. I reached into my laptop bag, the one Leo had mocked earlier, and pulled out a single notarized document. This is a surgical strike on your legal standing. Leo, as the majority lien holder of this property, and the primary consultant for the Van Doren Group, I have already filed a formal disclosure with the SEC. Every transaction you made, every ghost ledger entry you thought was deleted, and every penny of the $2.4 million you embezzled is documented right here. The status flip was now a legal reality. Leo wasn't just losing his job or his seat at the table. He was looking at a medical shock of federal proportions. Silas's daughter stood up, her face a mask of cold iron. She slid her wedding ring across the table. It made a sharp metallic clack as it hit the wood, a sound that signaled the final resolution of their marriage. "My father is a lot of things, Leo," she said, looking at him as if he were a stain on the carpet. "But he's not a fool, and he doesn't stay in business with people who betray their own blood. You wanted to be a titan? Well, titans are famous for falling. I suggest you call a lawyer. Although I doubt you have any money left to pay one." Leo slumped into his chair, the glow of the room's opulence now mocking his ruin. He had spent his life trying to keep me in the shadows, never realizing that the shadows are where the real power grows. The janitor had finished the audit. The house was empty. The resolution of the Sterling Van Doren empire didn't happen with a bang, but with the quiet hum of a server room at dawn. 3 months after that dinner, the glow of the family name had been entirely redefined. Leo was no longer the face of anything. He was a footnote in a federal investigation, currently serving the first year of a sentence for corporate fraud. Without the social mask of his sister's brilliance to hide behind, his entire career had evaporated like mist. My parents, once blinded by his false light, now lived in a quiet house I provided for them, finally forced to confront the medical shock that the child they had ignored was the only reason they weren't destitute. I stood on the balcony of the new Ether Van Doren headquarters, looking out over the shipping yards. Silas stood beside me, no longer just a client, but a partner who finally understood the value of the ghost in the machine. We had executed a surgical strike on the corruption that had nearly toppled his legacy, and the company was now more stable than it had been in 3 generations. "I spent 40 years looking for a successor," Silas said, staring at the horizon. "I looked at men who talked like lions and thought like kings. I never thought I'd find the answer in a woman who preferred to work in the dark. The dark is where the foundation is built." "Silas," I replied, the wind catching my hair, "everyone wants to be the steeple, but no one wants to be the stone that holds it up. I am no longer the hidden sister or the hired help. I am the CEO of the most powerful, strategic firm in the industry. The status flip is absolute. When I walk into a room now, the silence isn't one of exclusion. It's one of profound respect. I still don't wear the flashy diamonds or the loud labels. My power isn't something I wear, it's something I am." As the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over the city, I felt a deep sense of peace. The janitor had finished the job. The architect had built the future. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just observing the light, I was the source of it.